In this video, I'm going to teach you about variations of a conditional. Now, you should have already seen a conditional or an implication type of statement before. So let me just remind you. Our conditional statement is if then PQ, and there are three variations on this conditional. So we have the inverse, the converse, and the contrapositive. The inverse of the conditional if P then Q is if not P then not Q. The converse of the conditional if P then Q is if Q then P. And the contrapositive of the conditional if P then Q is if not Q then not P. I would suggest copying down this table to help you get this information organized. So here we have the name of the variation, the symbolic form of the variation, and then the way that you read that. Let's look at our first example. Here we're going to use the statements below to write the inverse, converse, and contrapositive. The statement P is you are compassionate. The statement Q is you contribute to charities. All right, so we're going to start by finding the inverse. Recall that our conditional is if P then Q, or P implies Q. Our inverse is not P implies not Q. So not P would be you are not compassionate. Not Q would be you do not contribute to charities. So the inverse is if you are not compassionate, then you do not contribute to charities. The converse is Q implies P. Q is you contribute to charities, and P is you are compassionate. So this is going to be if you contribute to charities, then you are compassionate. And then lastly, the contrapositive is not Q implies not P. Not Q would be you do not contribute to charities, and not P would be you are not compassionate. So we have if you do not contribute to charities, then you are not compassionate. Next, let's look at an example from your homework. This is homework from section 1.4. This is number 1. It says write the sentence represented by each of the following. P is the statement, she is a police officer. Q is the statement, she carries a gun. Now let's start by forming the conditional P implies Q. That would be if she is an officer, then she carries a gun. Next we'll look at the converse, which is right below that, Q implies P. So this would be if she carries a gun, then she is a police officer. Next we'll look at the inverse, which would be not P implies not Q. So if she is not a police officer, then she does not carry a gun. And the last is the contrapositive. The contrapositive is not Q implies not P. So this would be if she does not carry a gun, then she is not a police officer. And then lastly, they want to know which of these statements are equivalent. So let's take a look. I want to start by looking at the conditional, P implies Q, and I want to see if there's anything that matches that or anything that says an equivalent statement. So if she is a police officer, then she carries a gun. Right, so the converse isn't the same and the inverse isn't the same, but the inverse and the converse are the same. So if she carries a gun, then she is a police officer. And if she is not a police officer, then she does not carry a gun. Those mean the same thing. And then now let's compare the last two. If she is a police officer, then she carries a gun. If she does not carry a gun, then she is not a police officer. So those two things mean the same thing. Those are equivalent statements. If you have any more questions about variations of the conditional, please feel free to email me